Good day, everyone, and welcome to the SAT School Day Pre-Administration and Rostering webinar. I'm Eddie Pulaski from the College Board, and I'll be joined by Melanie Jones from the Idaho State Department of Education and Danielle Taylor from the Idaho State Department of Education. This is a recorded webinar, and the recording and the presentation deck have been forwarded to Idaho educators who will administer the SAT School Day. It's designed to provide an additional preparation tool for the upcoming SAT School Day test administration. If you have questions or need assistance, we'll have contact information at the end of the webinar. So let's get started. Our goals today are going to include reviewing the pre-administration session, discussing rosters, and reviewing the non-standard administration report, or the NAR. In this section, we'll cover the pre-administration session, how to prepare for the pre-administration session, and then how to conduct the pre-administration session. So what is the pre-administration session? Well, basically, it's a session that we work with in advance of test day that allows the students to fill out information on their answer sheets and hopefully to reduce the extra test day activities. The pre-administration session allows the students to fill out their personal information on their answer document, to identify colleges that they may want to send their score reports to opt into student search, which we'll talk about, and to complete the optional questionnaire. A couple of things about the benefits of the student search. The optional questionnaire will allow the students to opt into student search to basically place information in front of about 1,700 colleges, universities, and scholarship agencies so that they can look at a range of information about the students, where they go to high school, their interests, and what they plan to study in college. Then eligible students for colleges and scholarships and educational organizations will look at this information to find such things as expected high school graduation date, cumulative GPAs, intended college majors, and that allows them to search for students and to begin actually communicating with those students about the potential of attending their institution or applying for scholarships. Students can choose which of the optional questions that they complete, and participation in student search is an option for all students. So how do we prepare for the pre-administration session? First of all, let's talk about shipments. Pre-administration shipments with material have probably already arrived in most schools, and because of spring breaks, there may still be some material that will be coming to your school and arriving. But within those shipments, you'll find the following materials. In a separate shipment, you'll find your pre-ID label for students that were included in the bulk registration upload. Then in a shipment that will be separate from those pre-ID labels, you'll find your SAT student answer sheets, the student answer sheet instructions, the SAT School Day Student Guide, and this is a new document that basically is an overview for students and parents about the SAT School Day. All the manuals that are needed to support the administration, and those will be the test day supervisor manuals, the school day room testing manuals, and the accommodated testing manuals. And one thing that we do want to point out again is that the student data questionnaire this year has been eliminated and is actually incorporated into the SAT answer sheet. So let's talk a little bit about the pre-ID labels. The label contains the student's state-assigned student ID that was provided in the bulk registration file. The student will need the student ID when bubbling in his or her answer sheet. The label should be applied to the answer sheet before the pre-administration session. Any student who does not have a pre-ID label will simply be instructed to follow the directions for bubbling in his or her personal information on the answer sheet during the pre-administration session. Schools should be prepared to provide the students with his or her student ID. Now let's talk a little bit about verifying the information on the pre-ID labels. If the student's first name or last name listed on the label does not correctly reflect the student's name as it appears in your student information system, please do not use that label. The student should simply be asked to bubble in all required information on the answer sheet. However, if any other information on the label is incorrect, which might include the date of birth, the student ID, the school information, the label can still be used, because what's going to happen as the matching process takes place here, a match will begin with the student's name, and then with other bubbled in information, there's a way to match that student. However, if the student's name is incorrect on that pre-ID label, that label should not be used, and it should be destroyed in a secure manner. Preparing for the session. First of all, we have some suggestions about how to do this. We suggest that the people who will be administering this session just simply read the Prepare Your Pre-Administration Session area in the SAT School Day Supervisor Manual. Apply the labels to the correct answer sheet type. So if you have students that are testing with standard size answer sheets, or those that are using large block answer sheets, you want to make sure that you're applying the correct labels to either type of answer document. You'll need to, the following to conduct your pre-administration session. You'll need the answer sheets with the pre-ID labels already affixed, blank answer sheets in case you don't have pre-ID labels, or if one of the pre-ID labels was incorrect with the student name, the student answer sheet instructions, SAT school day guides, and the testing manuals, which will contain all of the instructions and scripts. One thing that we do share with you is that the session should be conducted in school, and you should never allow your students to take the answer sheets home. Preparing your staff, basically just have a meeting with them about how the administration sessions will go. You can distribute copies of the manuals and instruct them to become familiar with the pre-administration scripting, provide their room assignment, review the roles and responsibilities, review the materials that they're going to be working with, and most importantly, instruct them to display the school 6-digit AI code or attending institution code in a prominent place for the students to be able to see, because they're going to be asked to place that on the answer document during the pre-administration session. Finally, if you would like a little extra information, you can simply refer to the Prepare Your Pre-Administration Session of the Supervisor Manual for more detail. Preparing students. Again, we'll talk a little bit about the college selection area. We ask that you inform students that they'll be using number 2 lead pencils for this pre-administration session. We ask that you distribute the SAT School Day student guides to the students so that they can have a chance, first of all, to learn about them themselves, but also so that they can take those home to parents, and they and their parents can sit down and review a little bit about what they're going to be doing on test day. And finally, we ask that you share information about the pre-administration session in advance so that they can begin to look at both the student search service and go ahead and select which potentially 4 colleges that they'd like to have their free score sent to. So let's talk a little bit about conducting the pre-administration session, and I'm going to throw it over to Melanie Jones to talk a little bit about the setup and some of the things that we do beginning that pre-administration session. Melanie?
Great, thanks, Eddie. We've gotten some questions about how to conduct any kind of pre-test session for a student and what it could look like and what the potentials are. So we thought we'd give you some guidance on what current high school counselors and former high school counselors have done in the past, including what they're planning on doing this year. So we divided it up into sample potential activities and then sample potential conversation starters. So to begin, some activities could include setting up students' College Board accounts. We do want you to know that it's not required to test, so students can still participate in SAT School Day without a College Board account, but it could be a great use of time. You could review and demonstrate the Khan Academy resources off of the College Board website. So after scores are returned, it can be a great go-to resource as they continue to personalize and potentially improve their performance on the test. You can definitely ensure students have definitely want to ensure that students have the SAT student guide prior to any type of test session. So when you get those and you're together with your students, please make sure those are passed out. And then, as Eddie has alluded to, the optional student questionnaire, that's something that a lot of counselors use during this time with the student search function that was mentioned in an earlier slide. And some sample conversation starters, we really want to encourage the setting of a positive tone for SAT test day. We are aware that some students are a little more invested than others, but we believe that school staff have a big part in creating that ongoing positive tone for assessments and SAT and Go On in particular. The benefits of utilizing the four free score sends, even if a student is undecided, is something we would highly encourage a conversation around. So the college codes are on the answer sheet as mentioned, and that would be a great time to discuss that. Indecision doesn't have to prohibit someone sending a college their SAT results. The highlight structure of the new test day could relate to setting a positive tone. A lot of students are still under the mindset that they get penalized and that the words are very obscure, et cetera. But the new SAT has a different focus, and the focus is on knowledge, skills, and understanding, as is most important for college and career readiness and success. And there's only right-only scoring. There's no longer penalty for guessing. So we think that could be a very helpful message to pass along. And finally, related to next steps and indecision and go-on rates, of course, if you wanted to share the Idaho resource of the Next Steps website, that would be a great time to do that as well. And thanks again for all your activities and preparation for the SAT day. And we'll send it back to you, Eddie. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. All right, as we are looking at kind of really setting that positive tone and thinking about how this pre-administration session is going to work, I want to share just some really deep details here and provide some feedback for you about each of the sections and hopefully provide the best backup for what you're going to be doing during this session. So first of all, the session typically takes about 60 minutes or one class period. During that time, you distribute your pre-labeled answer sheets and answer sheet instructions to students. And I've bolded this particular area. You should make sure that you give the answer document to the correct student. And as simple as that may sound, oftentimes we find that one of the biggest mistakes that occurs during the pre-administration session is a student may not get their own answer document, and it causes a little bit of movement that has to take place about how to correct that. So part of this is just looking at how to make the day flow smoothly and positively for the students. Now, all students will complete the personal information, the score sends, and potentially the optional questionnaire. Now, in the personal information, including those with labels, they should all be asked to bubble in their own names, their school names, the school's AI codes, their date of birth, the address, the grade level, their sex, and the student ID. And as we're looking at this, one of the things that this does is it helps again with matching the students completely by using this particular system. With the score sends, they have the chance to pick out the 4 colleges that they'd like to have their scores sent to, and then the optional questionnaire, the students can choose to answer some or all of those questions so that they can work with the student search program. After the session, the associate supervisors or the staff members who conduct the sessions should collect all the answer sheets and student answer sheet instructions, confirm that all of the students entered their IDs correctly, and then return those answer documents to the test supervisor as instructed. Then the test supervisors will organize the answer sheets by alphabetizing them with testing room groups before returning them to the boxes, and then they securely store those boxes for the administration session. Everyone should track students who miss the session and plan a makeup session so that they can participate in the pre-administration session before testing, if at all possible. And then all manuals should be collected so that they can be provided for associate supervisors on test day. So let's talk briefly about rosters. In this section, we're going to talk about the master student list, how to create that, a sample of the master student list, the room rosters, optional testing room codes, and returning your rosters. So what is that master student list? Well, basically, it's going to be a list of the test takers from your school for SAT school day. Each of these will be broken down by the associate supervisor and for their room. Test supervisors will basically make a master student list either from a master student list if it's going to be in a large group setting, or for individual room rosters if they're going to be in smaller, say, classroom types of settings. The test supervisors, once these rosters have been made and they've been used on test day, the test supervisors will collect those and make a copy of those so that they can save those for at least 6 months after test day. And the reason for this is in the event of an irregularity or a discrepancy, the test supervisors may need to actually go back to the list and respond to any questions about what may have happened. And again, that copy will provide that information for you. You can have it readily available to you. The master list does replace the old online attendance roster that we used last spring. So you will not need to generate that particular roster again. This is one that you actually create, and it gives you some great flexibility about how you want to work with it. So we encourage you to pull a list of your eligible students from your student information system. You can continue to add new students to your master list as they come in, or you can take off students as maybe they exit your school and transfer to another school. They will not have, in some cases, pre-ID labels, so those students, again, will bubble in the pertinent items on their answer document. We also suggest that you have your SSD coordinator print a copy of the NAR so that you can match the total student master list and also see the students that are on the NAR to identify the number of rooms that are going to be needed for the administration, along with what types of accommodations those students are going to be using. And then basically you have completed the things that you'll do with assigning your staff from that particular master student list. So here's a screenshot of a sample master student list. We suggest that you just basically create that in an Excel or a Word format so that you have easy access to it. We suggest that you put in the fields that you see on this particular list, including an area where you can mark the attendance type, whether they were present, whether they were absent, if it's a student who just recently has moved, or if there was no entry for that student. And again, this will help as you are preparing for, if you have students absent on test day, preparing for ordering makeup material for the makeup test day that will come a little bit later in April. Room rosters. Once you have your room assignments for your staff, you can create the roster for each of the testing rooms for each of your associate supervisors so that they can record the attendance on test day. We encourage you to have the option to build your room rosters for accommodated testing rooms, or just simply use the copies of the NAR. As test day approaches, we encourage you to continue to account for any additional students who may be eligible for testing, transfer it in, transfer it out, and work with your SSD coordinator to see if there have been any recently approved accommodations And then you continue to update that master student list and room rosters literally all the way up until April 10th test day. Optional testing room codes. In some situations, schools will be using what we call the testing room code, which this is just a unique 3-digit number that you can apply to a particular room so that you can organize your answer sheets from the pre-administration session to actually go into your testing rooms on test day, and you can really finitely manage if an irregularity occurs, potentially where that actually happened, and have a very, very small subgroup to be able to work with the staff member who is working in that particular room can also help provide a little quicker resolution if there is an irregularity that occurs. Returning your roster. Once you've collected all the materials on test day, you just carefully check each room roster and NAR against the final master student list, making sure that all the material has been returned and has been returned properly. You return the master student list or individual room rosters so that that list can be returned with your answer sheet return shipment, and you also keep a copy of that master list in individual room rosters for your own records. Let's talk quickly about the non-standard administration report, or the NAR. In this section, we'll talk about the NAR, the timing, the NAR details, and then how to actually generate the NAR. The NAR provides a list of all students who have approved accommodations for testing. SSD coordinators access that and print that from College Board's SSD online dashboard. The NAR can be used as a room roster for the accommodated testing students. It includes a summary of students with their SSD numbers, a list of students who will test on the primary test date with accommodations, a list of students who will test during the accommodated testing window, additional instructions for testing students with accommodations. It's typically available 4 weeks prior to test day, so as we're recording this webinar, the NAR is available to SSD coordinators immediately. Until the NAR is available, the eligibility roster in SSD line is kind of your focal point. But again, those NAR rosters are now available, and as students are approved for accommodations, you'll see the NAR quickly populate, and you'll see potentially as those accommodations are approved, your NAR list will grow almost daily. The NAR details include the testing group to support the room planning, the student's name and their SSD number, a description of the approved accommodations, the identification of what color test booklet the student will use. If they're testing in with accommodations in a regular testing setting, they'll use a purple book. If they're going to be testing in an accommodated or in a smaller group setting, they'll be testing with a blue book. Identification of 1-day versus 2-day testing accommodations, and then identification of which scripts to use from the testing manuals for the test administration. How does one generate the NAR? Well, first of all, the SSD coordinator runs the NAR from the SSD online dashboard, and you'll see on the screen we've put a screenshot up where you would click to create the non-standard administration report. You would select SAT school day, confirm the AI code and the test date, and then that will help to begin the generation of the NAR. And there could possibly be 3 different scenarios that you will see once you begin that generation process. Scenario 1 is that there are no students approved for accommodations. And if that's the case, if you're a school that has a small number of accommodations that were potentially produced a little later on in the process, they may not be in that NAR report as of yet. So that's one possible scenario. Scenario 2, All students with approved accommodations match a student registration from that pre-ID or bulk registration file, and that means that entire NAR roster will be generated pretty quickly. Scenario 3, there are students who are approved with accommodations with a matched student registration, and those students are approved, but they didn't necessarily match completely what was provided in that pre-ID or bulk registration file. So I'm going to walk through 3 particular looks with this. Again, scenario 1, there were no students approved for the accommodations. The SSD coordinator will get a message that will look like this when running the NAR, and circled in red, there are no students with approved accommodations for the selected school. As the SSD coordinator looks at this and they know that they have potentially 1 or 2 students who they've placed in for accommodations requests, they basically will just continue to monitor the SSD system until those students are actually moved into an approved process, and then they will show up as part of the NAR. Scenario 2, all students are approved for accommodations and they match the student registration information that came with a pre-ID file. So when that takes place, those students literally will be moved into the account, and they will be able to generate the report, and they will see that report as I showed you just a little bit earlier. Scenario 3, this is where the students' approved accommodations are matched with the student registration, but there's a little information from that pre-ID file that doesn't necessarily match. So first of all, the first step in the process when this takes place is you'll want to view a list of matched students and click Continue. And then it's possible that there are students that may not match for a couple of reasons. One, the student transferred into the school after the upload date. 2, a student was registered into SSD Online that was a little bit too different than what was provided with the pre-ID bulk registration file. So for example, my full name is Charles Edward Pulaski. If the SSD coordinator in entering the information simply put me in as Eddie Pulaski, it is very likely that I would be one of those students that would not necessarily match completely. So when this happens, SSD coordinators will follow the 2-step process. Step 1, they select the additional students that will be testing, and you'll see this in the screenshot. Step 2, then you select Create the Non-Standard Administration Report to generate the NAR, and all of those students will be pulled into the NAR and will become a part of that roster. So that is a lot of information to share with you in about 28 minutes, but we hope that this will be a helpful webinar for you and that you will be able to not only view this and share information with your fellow educators who will be administering the SAT school day, but we will also make this webinar and the presentation slides available to you in case you want to do any training operations in your own school. So with that said, we appreciate you watching this a little later on. If you have questions, you'll see information there for Melanie Jones, Stephen McHugh, Eddie Pulaski, Melanie with the State Department of Education, Stephen McHugh, our field representative for College Board for Idaho, Eddie Pulaski, myself, our outreach and implementation representative. Please feel free to touch base with us at any time. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk with you again soon.